Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation on leading change. My name is Emma, and I've got Bob with me today, and we're going to be talking about practical agile today. But before I get to all the questions that I have for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Emma. My name is Bob Pick. I have two roles at Tokio Marine Group. The day job is as CIO for Tokio Marine North America, which is about $6 billion in property casualty, largely small commercial in the U.S. only. And then my nighttime job is as the deputy group CIO for Tokio Marine Group worldwide, where I work with my CIO colleagues around the world to try and figure out the directions and strategies we have for enterprise technology architecture, as well as dabbling in digital AI and innovation.
I'm always half expecting you to talk about the night job being fighting crime, but I suppose you have enough on your plate already.
Well, I might have to keep a few secrets.
There we
could
go.
Be mysterious.
So I teased that we're going to be talking about the idea of practical agile. But I think before we can kind of dive fully into that, let's set the stage by talking a little bit about, you sit down, you're in your role, you get white papers and all sorts of things from analyst firms or consultants telling you about how you should be implementing agile. Are what they are teaching realistic from your experience, or what have you seen in that capacity?
Yeah, in a word, no. So we can call it impractical agile or agile for giant companies that have people to throw at everything, or agile for tech companies where their business is building software. That's very different situations than most carriers, MGAs, and what have you. And what it normally takes the form of, let me step back. Luckily, I think we're past the days when Agile had that kind of almost religious fervor to it, that Agile was the goal. Although some of the analyst reports and recommendations that you get, it still sort of seems like that. For us, Agile has been a method, and we want to apply that method appropriately where it makes sense to, but we never had a goal that everything must be Agile, similar to we never had a goal that everything had to be cloud. These are techniques and approaches that we use because they make sense to use in the context in which you're looking to apply them. So I think that's one bit of goodness there, that we've gotten through the if it isn't Agile, it's crap phase of things. But on the other hand, there still is this, I think, unrealistic presumption that a lot of analysts and even Agile boosters have, that it's just fairly straightforward to pivot an organization, particularly an organization that is not necessarily centered around tech. And recognizing, I'll stipulate, we understand Agile is not a technology methodology. It's an overall methodology, I would argue, just for decision making. And the best applications of Agile involve tech and business and any other constituencies that you have there. But the reality is that a lot of what comes out from analysts push this impractical view where you're going to be able to just kind of, I won't say turn on a dime, but move very quickly, and that it's relatively seamless, and that you could just make it happen with a little bit of training. The reality is Agile is not just a technical logistical matter. It is a culture change, and OC and tremendous amounts of org change management that go into it. And this takes a while because we're people, but it also takes a while because other methodologies or other approaches that we have, whether it's old school waterfall, and I don't think there are really too many companies out there that do true waterfall. I think most do what we do, which is hybrid, where maybe it's iterative development with relatively consistent show back to business with early business testing. So some of the trappings or hand-picked rituals of Agile, but applied into something that's a little bit more linear, start, middle, end. I think these are very, very typical, but people get used to things. People develop pathways. And the reality is that these other techniques can and are successful. So you're not just throwing them out in the case of failure. Sometimes you're trying to move or adapt or evolve, even in the face of general success. So you need to be, I think, cognizant of that. And a lot of the outside commentators, many of whom have not actually run a shop before, tend to forget that. You have to overcome and really figure out a way that this can be an opportunity-based conversation, one that draws people into that evolutionary step versus just tut-tutting that what they're doing now isn't adequate, even when they have evidence of very reliable release patterns and very reliable software delivery for, in some cases, decades, and you're asking them to do something differently. But I think the key thing is that there are a lot of analysts that write for the audience of tech, the audience of CIO, CTO, head of application delivery, et cetera. And Agile done correctly, in my opinion, is not just a tech thing. It's a whole business culture change. And that doesn't mean that you literally change it for the whole business, but for that project, that engagement, that product that is being offered via the Agile methodology, it's one where everybody has to be along for the ride and engaged. And whenever you have cases or situations, which I think are true of most carriers I know of, MGAs and others in the insurance industry, where you don't have unlimited teams, perhaps you use the same team for operational maintenance and break fix as you do for project work. You can't have those same people peel out to Agile in one part of their brain, but still do the old in the other part of their brain without a lot of thought around it. And I think the oversimplification that we still see from some of the outside analysts and recommenders can still cause some significant challenges. But I will say, I think it's getting better. I think things are getting less impractical, more realistic as Agile continues to evolve in its applied use.
Well, there's two things that you said there. One, sounds like you guys maybe aren't necessarily chasing shiny objects just to chase shiny objects, whether that's on the methodology side or you mentioned cloud or other tools, but really looking, and I know through some of our conversations, looking at what are, again, the real implications of the decisions that you're making and how does that play out in reality as opposed to marketing or analyst conversations. And I think then the second thread here in my mind is, so great, we recognize that maybe this isn't as easy as a wand swish as we think it is. And from the content that I create and the feedback that I get, especially if I utter the word agile on TikTok, I am flooded with comments of people being like, it doesn't work, it slowed us down, it broke everything. So for anybody that's in that position, where maybe they tried the wand swish and it didn't work, how can we implement Agile practically? Like you were saying, as a methodology, as opposed to this rigid, like almost religious mindset.
Yeah, and I'll say we and I personally absolutely do fall for the chase the shining object thing. So we all do that. In this particular case, though, in cloud as well, I think we were able to be a little bit more kind of thoughtful about it because our existing methodologies were working. We're getting a lot of stuff done. I'm thinking of our Tokio Marine North America companies. We put out a lot of releases, a lot of software, a lot of good stuff. And we're generally speaking, that process has been extremely reliable. What we're trying to figure out is how we're able to do more with the same people, how we're able to deliver in a more timely fashion and in a more, I always use the word relevant. Like we want everything we do to be as relevant as possible for the businesses we support. And there is a time limit to that relevancy. So the more that we can be engaged fully and continuously in that decisioning process, the better. So this one sort of makes sense. But I think the avoidance of kind of tripping up as you're trying to wave the magic wand, and I think we made probably every mistake that everybody else has made. You start too fast. You pick a small project and say, we're going to do that true Agile. Great, but you haven't necessarily thought through what that means in the context of, for example, a program management office that isn't Agile. So how do you put a true Agile project in the middle of, or true Agile effort in the middle of something that measures on the basis of hybrid or waterfall project? Got to think through these things. So the idea that you start small, I think is very meaningful. Start with a partner. It can be an SI partner, it can be a consulting partner, or just maybe it's someone in your corporate family that just has already done Agile. They've already figured some things out. Work with them to figure out how to do it. And by the way, do it their way. Try doing it their way a time or two or five to see how it feels, see what works and what doesn't work in your environment. If you go in, as I did, and you say, look, I'm going to read up on Agile and I'm going to take the classes and all that, but I already know how this is going to play out, then you're kind of eliminating some of the benefit of that Agile ideation kind of thought process upgrade and education before you've even kind of taken it all in. So we formed in one of our companies an Agile working group. the Agile Task Force, which actually existed for several years in order to, and it had multidisciplinary membership, everything for everyone from release and environment management to different development domains, data integration, project management, finance, et cetera, to look at all this stuff. And as we did those first couple, evaluate what's working, what isn't working, what should we pivot to versus, what do we need the method to pivot to because it's part and parcel of how we do business. That was extremely helpful. A lot of folks talk about Agile coaches, and I was initially kind of reluctant to go down that path, but finding an Agile coach, the right Agile coach who can match your corporate culture, your vocabulary, is extremely helpful. Someone who can really be in the weeds with you, who can even help you run some of the rituals in early days to just get a feel for it. And then as you make your adaptations, they can help you do it in a way which is as compatible with Agile theory as it can be. And I think there's goodness in that. But the other factors I'd throw in real quick are you have to think about updating your tooling. The old school tooling that you use for waterfall or hybrid projects isn't likely to apply readily to when you're doing Agile. You have to train and discuss and talk and train and cry and work through things and get frustrated and train some more. And it isn't just tech folks or even necessarily sometimes primarily tech folks. It's business too. It's everybody that's involved. But also that includes your finance folks. That includes folks who are going to be seeing a request for a backlog budget that continues versus a project budget that has a beginning, middle, and end, and the clear deliverable at the end to say we've had success. And these are areas that I know we didn't necessarily think of up front. And then the final one is measurement. So measuring Agile efforts as you did projects or even just day-to-day development work isn't necessarily going to fly long term. And this is an area that we're still very much working on. We don't think we have the answer here because we have been successful in our prior suite of metrics. Applying those to our Agile, our more fully Agile efforts that we're undertaking in the last few years has been challenging. And that's something that we're still working through. But thinking through that so you don't trip up on it, absolutely key. All those kind of form the soup of how to avoid falling in your face when waving the magic wand.
Well, and that last one of thinking through how it impacts finance and the way that you have to kind of move through that process, I think is really a very astute one to bring up, because especially again, even on the software side, when we move from perpetual licensing to SaaS licensing, I saw, as a software sales rep, how many times I had to tell my people hey, make sure you're talking to finance about how this is going to impact things and that you're aware of the implications that switching this model does. And, the amount of times I've told people, please make friends with finance, find someone in accounting that gets to be your buddy that helps you run these numbers so that you know that you're thinking through all of the different components. But even having coached people on that in the past, I don't know if I would have pulled that out as a thread to make sure you're paying attention to. So it's a really important call out there. But you also mentioned in there, and maybe some of the lessons, this kind of ties to that too, some of the lessons that your team learned going through this process. Do you have specific areas that you can kind of pinpoint that help drive you towards this more practical approach?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of things that a couple of us were talking about just the other day on this. The first overarching one is more of a recommendation or an absolution, which is get over the shame of not being true full Agile for 20 years. Just put it aside. Everyone in tech, I know I certainly felt this, if you're not doing Agile, just get over the shame. It's fine. Everything's fine. And Agile as a method that you can learn from, you can adopt fully. You can go full safe if you want to. You get all the different variants, or you can just take pieces as it makes sense. It's all good. So once you get over that kind of headache of I don't know what it is, guilt, shame, whatever it is, of not already being Agile because, someone at a startup that's 5 years old on the West Coast is full Agile and you at a 150-year-old carrier are not, just get over it. But also I think planning and thinking about how you're going to approach this, recognize that the people part of this takes more time than the process and the tech. It is culture change, and it's particularly for those for participants in Agile work that come up through enterprise technology. We are taught rigor, we're taught auditability, we're taught all these things. Know what you're going to build before you build it, and then say and show what you built. We have to unlearn some things, or at least we have to learn separate pathways to be able to do these things. It takes time. That's where a coach can be helpful, working with a good SI partner, or again, another group in your own corporate family that's been doing this can be super helpful. We talked about the financial aspects, but for sure, bringing finance along, and anyone in your SDLC outside of your core tech or tech business team who is involved at different points in either governance or oversight, making sure they know what you're doing, what your goals are for undertaking an agile rework to your process. I almost said transformation, but I don't believe in using that word anymore. I think that is super helpful. Also, I have to say, thinking about whether, how, and when product ownership and product management as a compatible, related discipline comes in is a really important consideration. I know for us, we prioritized trying out Agile before we really had a perspective on product owner. And product owner, of course, becomes so critical because Agile, even if you're not doing it full steam ahead, it does require more or less real-time decision-making on the part of your business sponsor and your tech folks. Not having that in place where you get one-stop shopping for those decisions, those practical operational decisions, can be really, really difficult. So I guess I'd say Agile isn't just about Agile. It's about all the things that relate to it. But that real, or more closer to real-time decision-making, is a critical thing that you need to prepare for. And then the final thing that we were talking about a little bit is we all know that there are rituals, there are processes in Agile that are different from hybrid or waterfall. Totally get that. But understanding that needs to be instantiated. You have, if you use an online system, or you use something for requirements management that goes through to QA. I'm not going to mention the specific names, but we all know what they are. You have to prepare for that. You're not just training people on it, but you have to have a perspective as to how your shop is going to use those tools. Do you need to create a different form, a different report, those sorts of things? It's slightly different than naming all the KPIs associated with it, but just the apparatus of running demand in an Agile context can be a little different or very different than running it in a hybrid or waterfall context. Got to think through these things. The good news is there is a ton of information out there. There are a ton of resources, people who have done this before, and we certainly took advantage of a lot of those folks external to our family of companies, but also internal to our family of companies, folks who've just done more than we had. And if you go in with that open-minded and kind of open-handed approach, saying, we're looking to do this, do you have any thoughts? Light up your network. Have your development leads, your project management leads light up their network. You can get great advice. There's nothing that we're doing in, for example, Tokio Marine North America that hasn't been done before, that other companies haven't done before, but it's new to us. And the trick is, when you're doing it, when you're beginning to evolve in your delivery methods, you still have to continue delivering. So it's not like you can stop, take 3 or 6 months, and then get back to your project portfolio and fixing bugs and developing great software. You have to continue doing something on the left hand and do it on the right hand. Gartner calls it bimodal, and it's not just related to Agile, but that's really difficult whenever you are at medium scale or small scale, not large scale, but it's also difficult at large scale too, because you have to have an organization that is literally beginning to think with 2 different sets of brains. And the rituals are different, the form work is different, the tools are different, the attitude is different, the business engagement is different, et cetera. So you have to give yourself and your staff grace to learn from others, read all the books, take all the training, but also just talk to people who've made all the mistakes before. And then hopefully you can make only new mistakes in this endeavor and not repeat the old ones.
Well, I'm going to have you back on so we can have a whole separate conversation about why we don't love the word transformation. I tried taking to the internet and saying we should rename it instead of an analyst firm or one of the big 4 renaming it. And everybody told me to stop because it's already confusing how many times things are renamed. But that is one that drives me a little crazy too, even though I live and breathe in this space. So part 2 coming at you, everyone, eventually.
Sure. Yeah, business conformance realignment is one that I've heard. Which is it means nothing, but it's very long, so it's high value.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's where you get the value, is the extra words.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for the conversation, Bob, and for everybody for joining us. If you're not already, make sure you make your way over and give them a follow on LinkedIn. But thank you again for your time, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.